So it's my pleasure to present the updates of our meta-analysis. Um, we will, during my presentation, address 4 items. We will shortly review the evidence, including the accuracy of HPV tests on self-samples compared to clinician samples. We will also update pooling of randomized trials that look for the efficacy to reach underscreened women by offering them a self-sample compared to routine invitations. Then we switch to the interference between self-sampling and the COVID pandemic, and we'll end by discussing the shortage in supplies for HPV screening and HPV testing. So first, the accuracy of HPV testing on self-samples with the purpose to detect cervical precancer. We have updated the review of the literature, and we included a new paper the day before yesterday, so it's quite up to date. And we see that our conclusions do not really change. Here we have an rock plot where we have the specificity in the y-axis, the sensitivity in the y-axis, and the specificity, sorry, in the x-axis. In red, we have the clinician samples. In blue, the self-samples. If we use signal amplification-based tests like hybrid capture, Cervista, hrHPV, we see that there's a clear difference in sensitivity, and there's even a lower specificity when we use hybrid capture on self-samples. However, if we use clinically validated PCRs, we have nearly similar, very similar sensitivity and specificity for CN2+, and believe me, the same situation I could show you for CN3 as well, but there we have less done. So we conclude that by updating our meta-analysis, we come to the same conclusions as for our previous published reviews. It means that clinically validated PCR-based assays have similar sensitivity, slightly lower specificity on a self-sample versus on a clinician-taken cervical sample. And this evidence is quite robust for several devices, storage media, also for dry swabs, also in women with HIV. Nevertheless, we warn that it is important to use formal validation protocols for sample handling, and the community is waiting now also for validation rules for HPV testing on self-samples. We are working on that. Now, next topic is how can offering self-sampling kits improve screening coverage, and in particular, how can we reach underscreened women? Here we have pooled randomized trials, usually with 2 arms. One arm means women are offered a self-sample, and the other arm, women receive an invitation to contact a clinician to have a pap smear taken. So I just show you the summary table. We distinguish 3 strategies. Mail to all non-screened women, not screened between a certain time, receive a self-sample device at home. Opt-in means those women can get a self-sample if they request self-sample. And door-to-door, here we have studies only done in South America and in Africa, where health workers visited at home women and offered a self-sampling device, versus women were invited to come to the health center to have a pap smear taking. We have here the proportions of participation in the self-sampling arms in the 3 scenarios. Here in the control arms, where we see that when women receive the kit, the self-kit at home, the participation rate was more than 2 times higher. There was a participation difference of 13%. When they have to request actively the self-sample in the opt-in scenario, we still had an increase in participation, but it was not significantly significant, and there was only a gain of 3%. When women receive the self-sample direct from the healthcare worker, the increase in participation also doubles compared to control actions. Now, a new strategy could be HPV testing on a urine sample. We have very fresh data now. The VALHUDES study was a study conducted in colposcopy clinics enrolling 500 women, and we compared HPV testing on urine with HPV testing on the cervical samples taken by a clinician, and we observed similar sensitivity and specificity for CN2+. We also included a questionnaire, and 500 women enrolled had to answer the question what they would prefer for the next screening, and a majority would prefer self-sampling. About 40% would prefer to still to go to the doctor. Among those who expressed preference for the next screening by self-sampling, we see that more than 50% would prefer to use a urine device, 40% a vaginal brush, and 8% do not have preference for the one or the other. So offering self-samplings for HPV is more effective to trigger a response than sending invitation letters where women are advised to go to a clinical service for the collection of a cervical specimen. Urine may become an additional user-friendly alternative for self-collection. We observed, I did not show that, but believe me, the response was highly variable among settings. Therefore, we should set up pilots before enrolling a self-sampling strategy. Important is that women with a positive HPV self-sample should be followed, and therefore it would be interesting in the future to have triage methods that can be used on the self-sample, and then we avoid additional visit to contact the doctor for cytology triage, which is the usual recommended follow-up strategy in women who have an HPV positive result at screening. As many previous speakers at this session, at the previous sessions this morning and yesterday have already highlighted, we observed interruption this year in spring. According to the International Cancer Screening Network, there was interruption in 88% of screening programs, most often in Europe, North America, Oceania. We observe that many health authorities promote HPV testing on self-samples. This is now promoted by several European professional societies and International Cancer Organization as being a safe alternative for collection of for HPV testing, and in particular, this is now boosted during the current pandemic. In Sweden, self-sampling is now the first strategy to reach women in general for the next screening. It's also considered in the future for Netherlands, but no decisions have been taken yet. I just show here a few publications where I referred to in my previous slides. Mario and others have highlighted that COVID has generated shortages in the supply chain for cervical cancer screening. Self-sampling is not yet approved by the FDA for use in the United States. But recently, in a paper of the journal of the National Cancer Institute, Feldman suggested to use pathways followed for urgent approval of such tests and apply them also in approval processes of HPV screening on self-samples. Now, an interesting opportunity that came up in our institute is that we were requested to write a protocol for validation of SARS-CoV-2 tests, and they were in particular interested in our VALHUDES protocols. And now we are starting with the VALCOR, where we will apply VALHUDES principles to validate corona tests. In the other way, there are new rapid, cheap, and accurate SARS-CoV-2 assays, and in the future, as already suggested by Mario, this could be translated also in HPV assays. Now, for the moment, we consider 11 high-risk HPV DNA tests as being validated for screening on cervical specimen. A few more assays are partially validated. Now, a future rule for validation of HPV testing on self-samples could be that two conditions are fulfilled. A, the assay is already validated on cervical samples, and in a study like VALHUDES, we demonstrate similar sensitivity and specificity for CN2+ on a self versus a clinician sample. If these two conditions are fulfilled, we could accept HPV with that test on self samples in screening. And if certain details are changed, another brush to obtain the self sample, another liquid, it would not be necessary to set up new VALHUDES or Meyer studies. We just could look for test concordance, and this would yield quicker validations. And therefore, it would be nice if the fora involved in VALHUDES and VALHUDES studies, Meyer protocols, and the WHO pre-qualification could collaborate in the future. Shortages in supply. This has been documented in a previous presentation. I refer here to a recent survey of the American Cancer Society that has documented that there were supply problems in testing for several infectious agents, for STDs in particular, and HPV testing in particular. And this might undermine the 70% screening coverage 2030 target of the WHO elimination initiative. And therefore, it will be crucial that new tests, new devices that will come up, and some will come up in an accelerated way due to the corona epidemic, that we validate them quickly and robustly, and in particular, devices and assays applicable in low and middle income countries are needed. Dear Paolo, dear colleagues, I thank you for your attention.